Auzubillahi minash-shaytanir rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Thank you very much, Abdullah. Abdullah forgot to introduce himself. He's our fourth year MBBS student. MashaAllah, brilliant young man. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min 'ilmin la yanfa' wa min qalbin la yakhsha wa min nafsin la tashba' wa min da'watin la yustajabu laha. I start with this prayer because the topic that we would be discussing today is a topic around which a lot of confusion has been created these days. And it's a topic that is very much relevant to healthcare professionals at all levels and of all types. Therefore, it is very important that we understand that being a Muslim, what are the etiquettes of such interaction in our healthcare provision, and how can we avoid the problems that we see today in this world. The learning outcomes for this session are three. We will try to engage in a discussion so that we are able to draw some guidelines for gender interaction in light of the teachings of Islam for our own practice, and that we are able to present the Islamic concept of gender interaction to other students and colleagues, and we're able to facilitate the application of these guidelines in our own circles of influence at our personal and professional levels. Now, I've organized this session into three segments. In our first session, we will be talking about the basic concepts related to gender interaction. As I said, there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity around these two words, gender and interaction. Therefore, it's very important that we clarify some concepts before we move ahead towards what is to be done and what are the guidelines for such professional interaction. In our second segment, we would see why is it so important to talk about it today. Men and women are as old as antiquity. Since Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. So why is it become so important to talk about this topic today? Then lastly, we will see that the picture that emerges out of that discussion, what are the problems and what are the guidelines to deal with those issues in today's world in the context of healthcare profession. So these are the three segments, A, B, and C. Before moving on to the discussion, I'm going to present some cases for us to think about it and see the landscape of our discussion, what it would be, and what would be the scope of the discussion that we are going to have. And these cases are related to our healthcare practice. I'm going to project these cases. I'm going to give the audience a few seconds to read through them, and then I'm going to move on, inshallah. So this is the first case. I'll leave it on for a few seconds so that we can read it. With each case, there are certain questions that need to come in our mind, and we have to see whether these questions are being raised, and if at all these questions are being raised, are we addressing them? And what way are we addressing them? This is the second case. The third case. Fourth case. Fifth case. Sixth case. This is the last case. As you see, as medical students, as doctors, the cases that you have just seen, I'm sure that they would be relatable to our own practice, our own experiences. Now, during the discussion, we will see that can we answer these questions that are raised in these cases. Now we move on to the first segment, which is the clarification of some basic concepts related to gender interaction. This session is A, and on the slides, you would see this A, which would tell us that we are still in our first session. I would try to share some misconceptions that are related to gender interaction. And some of these misconceptions may come as a shock to our audience. Gender interaction does not relate to professional practice. Professional practice is gender neutral. Now, as professionals, we've been hearing this from our teachers and from our colleagues that doctors don't have any gender. Patients do not have any gender. It's a concept that does not have any logic. Being doctors and patients does not make us above the basic human needs. And we are still open to the risks that are there with being a human being. And our basic needs that are related to gender, they cannot be ignored just because we are a doctor and we are a professional. The Islamic guidelines for gender interaction discriminate against women. Now, this is again a misconception that during the discussion, inshallah, we will try to clarify this. The Islamic guidelines for gender interaction cannot cater for the professional needs of today. We are so advanced now. Today, our development has gone to the stage where this deen can no longer cater for our needs. This is a misconception, which we would try to remove during our discussion. The exposure to opposite gender during education enhances the confidence, self-esteem, and academic achievement of the students. Again, this is a misconception because research evidence is telling us that this is not so. And this research evidence, unfortunately, has not come from Muslim countries. This has come from UK, from the Western countries, and some recent evidence from even in Indian schools. Medical, dental, and nursing students would have to face patients and colleagues of opposite gender after their graduation. So why not during their studies? So there's no logic of gender segregation during their education. Now, this again is a misconception. And this goes against the very basic logic of how we develop as human beings. The things that are permissible and we allow our children to do at the age of 5, 6, or 7, and the things that we do not allow them and we allow them later on in their lives are based on the level of their maturity, their confidence, and their competence. A first year medical student is not allowed to perform surgeries, while a final year student is allowed to assist the surgeon during surgeries. So why is that so? Why not in first year? So during their graduation years, the students are less mature, less knowledgeable, less sensitive to the needs of others, and as they develop and improve their professional development and their professional identity, they are safe in having cross-gender interactions within the boundaries of Islam. Gender interaction is haram under all circumstances. This is again the very other end of the spectrum. Gender interaction relates to how we deal as men and women in our workplace. Now, this again is a misconception because it's not just the workplace where the gender interaction is happening. It's happening in our houses. It's happening in public places. It's happening in times of war and in times of peace, in social gatherings, in online environments. And all those principles that are applicable to face-to-face gender interaction, they are applicable to these gender interactions as well. Gender interaction is an individual's choice, as is the gender itself. It's a huge fitna of this time, and we will try to touch with this concept as well, but I'm not sure that we would have enough time to discuss it because it's a whole topic on its own. Safe and professional gender interaction is the affair of an individual. Institutions should not interfere with it. Society has got nothing to do with it. Societal norms have got no role to play in this gendered interaction because it's an individual's affair. The conduct of men and women in the workplace is governed by professional ethics and has got nothing to do with Islam or any other faith-based guidelines. This is again a misconception. The perils of gender intermixing primarily impacts women. It's not as sensitive an issue for men. And this is wrong at so many levels. We have seen lives of men destroyed, their families destroyed, their reputation destroyed, their professional identity torn into pieces because of the problems that they have had of an improper gender interaction. So it affects men and women, both. Women are affected more, but that does not mean that men are immune to the perils of this unsafe gender interaction. Haya is in our hearts. It doesn't matter how we dress up or carry ourselves as men and women. Again, a very big misconception. If haya is in our hearts, it should be reflected in our actions as well. It's not enough that we say that it is in my heart and that's all. As teachers, it is not our responsibility to advise students about gender interaction, since they are adults and responsible for their own behavior. The basic mandate of a teacher is not to get a student graduated as a doctor. The mandate of a medical teacher, of a healthcare professional teacher is to make a good professional, a good human being. And that encircles all aspects of life. So this again is a huge misconception as well. Now let's look at the two basic words that we have used: gender interaction, gender and interaction. When we discuss these two topics, if you see G on the slide, that means we are talking about the concept of gender. And when you see I, then we are talking about the interaction part of it. So we are in our first segment and we are talking about gender. Now, as you saw in the title, we're talking about Muslim healthcare professionals. And my understanding is that my audience are mostly Muslim medical doctors and students. So we start with this thing that we believe in Quran and Sunnah as the guidelines, the eternal guidelines for us. So when we are looking at the basic concepts of gender interaction, we have to ask ourselves, is Quran guiding us with regard to the creation of these genders? And what is the perspective that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us in Quran? And when we try to seek for it, this ayah is there. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. When we look at this ayah, since my audience are mostly from Pakistan, so I'll be sharing translation in Urdu and English both. When we look in this ayah, the key word here with regard to the creation of gender, the first key word is the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. خلقكم من نفس واحدة, then نفس واحدة, and then men and women, and lot of men and women. So when we try to explore this a little more and see that what concept is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving us with regard to the creation of genders, we see that the creator created nafse wahida. And then the nafse wahida, from nafse wahida, we have men and women. When we look at this, we feel and it appears that the humanity has been divided into two groups. It has been divided. There's a duality into it. And when we look at this duality, it appears that the human race has been divided. Now, to understand what kind of division is this, what is the nature of this division? Is it discriminatory or is it complementary? One of our misconceptions was that our deen is discriminatory against women, one of the genders. So from this very ayah, let's try to clarify this misconception. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I created the single soul, nafse wahida. Now, when we look at this word, the key word, nafse wahida, we understand who is this nafse wahida. Allah is referring to Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. Now, Allah has mentioned Adam alayhi salam 25 times by his name. Why didn't he mention his name here? Why was the word wahida used here? And why was the word nafs used here? The word nafs for the soul. Now we understand that Allah is trying to give us this concept that men and women, with regard to the aspect of them being the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are the same. For him, both are his creations. And he did not say that they both of them, he created a man, and from that man he created men and women. He has used the word nafse wahida. So it very much clarifies that there is no discrimination between men and women as the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this duality that we see is complementary and not discriminatory. Why do I say that it's complementary? If you look at this division, you see that the division moves towards the creator like that. It is integrating towards, it's focusing towards the creator, the one who has created. So that is our identity. We are the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are his abd, and abdiyat is our identification. That is our identity. And that is the sole purpose of the creation of man and women. Now, when we look at the word nafs, that has been used 298 times in Quran, and it has been used in these meanings: self, heart, person, living being, life, and breath. And even if this phrase has got no connotation of gender to it. So this very ayah tells us that there is no discrimination between men and women as the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has created us as one of his signs through which we can we can glorify him, signs through which we can see him and we can appreciate his magnanimity. Now, the men and women as creations, we understand, are the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, a little more into this concept. So, when these men and women, when they do something, when they have deeds, are the deeds equally, are they given the kind of ajr for both the deeds of men and women equally, or is it different? Is the salah of a man and the salah of women, is there any difference in that, the way they are given ajr by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? And when we look at that from the Quran, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that man amila salihan min zakarin wa unsa wa huwa mu'minun. If that one is a believer, that's the only condition. If the person is a believer, whether he's a man or a woman, then they would get the same kind of reward for that deed. So whether it's Hajj, Zakat, Salah, Sadaqat, whatever. And then again he says that inna khalaqnakum min zakarin wa unsa wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. So that is the standard. This is where Allah differentiates between his uh, creation, who is near to him, who loves him the most. Now, when we look at men and women, we see that Allah said that there were so many men and women created, and from then, more of them. So, what was the logic of having them? So that a human being society, a Muslim society is created, where the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is established. So, this is the mandate of men and women. So, what are the attributes that Allah expects from these men and women? We again could go to Quran and we see that Allah guides us with regard to this aspect with this ayah. إن المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والقانتين والقانتات والصادقين والصادقات والصابرين والصابرات. Beautiful ayah in which each of the attributes are mentioned for men and women separately, so that nobody has got any confusion with regard to this aspect, that if I'm a man or if I'm a woman, am I privileged or am I underprivileged because of my gender? And when we look at the translation of these attributes that Allah has given us, when we look at these, we see that these 10 attributes, all of them have got nothing to do with gender. So there is no discrimination or inequality with regard to men and women as believers having attributes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes us to have. We are talking about the basic concept of gender. Now, the contemporary understanding of gender, what is it? There are three things that I would like to share with you. Sex is the biological sex that we have. Gender is the social construct that is woven around it. And this gives us an identity. When we look at these components, they need to be in a biopsychosocial alignment. And this is the model for health, which is now being promoted and is established as the model for the definition of health, biopsychosocial model for health. When this biopsychosocial alignment is there, what we get is biopsychosocial health in its physical, mental, and spiritual forms. Now let's move to the next concept, which is interaction. We saw what the concept of gender was in light of the Quranic teachings. We had to be, because of time management, we have to be very brief in that. Now we are looking at the second concept, which is interaction. Now, sociology tells us that the way individuals behave when they meet or spend time together, and it involves verbal, non-verbal, and online communication. So the way we communicate with each other. Now, communication is not just words, exchange of words, the gestures, the body language, the demeanor with which we carry ourselves, all of it is part of the interaction. Gender interaction happens where? It happens at workplace. And as I said when we were discussing misconceptions, it can happen at public places, other situations, in social gatherings, and at home as well, where families and friends meet, and sometimes strangers come into our house, and that interaction is there. And we need to be aware that that interaction is happening. Now, when we talk about workplace or any other type of gender interaction, it can be of three different natures. Now, one is the superiority, subordination kind of a nature of an interaction. The other is equality. And the third one could be mutuality. This is the nature of gender interaction that we can have. Now, let's try to explore these two words, equality and mutuality. Each word that we use in our life is a representative of a philosophy. Words do not get created just like that by accident. There's a whole philosophy behind it. And we as human beings are thinking beings. Descartes said that cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So we are thinking beings, and each one of us has got a philosophy. When we talk to people, when we share our ideas, our words tell us what our philosophy is. So when we look at the word equality, what kind of philosophy is behind this word? And when we look at the gender interaction related literature, we see that this is the word that is used mostly. In fact, this is the only word that is used for describing this interaction. Equality is basically a distributive philosophy. It tells us what is to be taken, what is to be given. A very mechanical kind of a concept. And this brings us to a receiving end, divides us into you and I, yours and mine, and creates a kind of a competition. And this is exactly what we are seeing today, that men and women have become adversaries to each other. They are standing against each other instead of working together for the raza of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for his pleasure. We have come against each other. Now, when we look at the word mutuality, you would have never heard this word in gender-related literature today. The philosophy behind mutuality is contributive. What would I be doing for others? What do I have to contribute? And it takes us to the giving end. We talk in terms of ours, not me and you. And it's a constructive philosophy, not a competitive one. So the earlier concept of gender and sex that we used, we said that sex is biological, a mechanical kind of a physical concept, and gender is a social construct. And this is what a contemporary gender specialists also claim. So if we go by that philosophy, which is the word that aligns with sex and which is the word that aligns with the narrative of gender? And it becomes very clear that the word sex goes with equality, and the word gender represents and is aligned with mutuality. If that is so, if this is the philosophy of these words, then why are we using the word equality? And we can very well understand that what would be the consequences of the narrative if these words are still being used. Let's explore it a little more. Now, when we use the word equality, the people that we interact with, we refer to them as contacts. And who are included in this contact? Women, you have heard the word girl child, female colleagues, male colleagues, as if we are inanimate objects. And when we talk about mutuality, this translates into relations. And we talk about mothers, daughters, and sisters, brothers, fathers, and brothers. So when we look at this, when we are talking to our patients, we call them, if it's an elderly lady, we call her mother. If we see a younger lady, we call her a daughter or a sister. So these relationships, what they bring and what equality does not bring. Equality, the word equality is the consequence of using that word and going by its philosophy has brought us to no moral bindings, and it promotes sexism. And that's exactly what is being happening. While mutuality takes us to moral obligations, accountability, it binds us, it demands some moral values from us. So this is how the whole fiasco of these words has brought us to. But the concept is now becoming. And you can very well see that what is this? This is equality. So if we are promoting this word with its philosophy, then we should not be demanding this. When we look at the landscape of human workplace, where this interaction, as we said, we would be focusing on this particular interaction, which happens in the workplace for the healthcare professional, we see that what is the history of human beings? How did we come up to this? So men and women both had to come out of their unit, the societal unit, their house, their home. But when we look at the ladies, how did they have to come? When we look at the historical perspective, we see that in our agrarian societies, the requirements of the agriculture were so that yes, women had to work with men. Then colonization forced them to work in places where it was inhuman to even work, but they were forced to do it. Then the needs of the industrialization. Women had to work. They were again forced to work in industries. In the post-World War era, when so many men had died, women had to come out of their houses to cater for the needs of their family. Now, a strange phenomena has happened recently. And for the current perspective, the modern era, where the need is not just financial, it's a socio-political call, and which is now being promoted through philosophies like feminism. We will be talking a little about feminism as well, inshallah. Now we look at the word action, interaction, and intermixing. So we talked about gender, then we talked about interaction a little. We are now looking at what is interaction and how is it different from intermixing, and what is the need for it. We see that men and women have got different roles. That is why their physical, their psychosocial, and their social responsibility domains, they are different. Now, with these differences, men and women have to work in certain areas together, and that is interaction where it is need-based. When we talk about interaction, again, sociology tells us that for an interaction to work, now when there's a purpose behind an interaction, it has to work. Otherwise, there is no need for it to be there. For an interaction to work, everyone involved needs to understand the code. The code, what is the code? The code is the words, the worldview, and the wardrobe. People who have to interact with each other, they need to understand their words, which is communication. They need to understand the worldview, their perspective, their philosophy, and the wardrobe that is appropriate for that interaction. And we will be touching about on all three aspects of interaction involving these areas. When you look at this figure, you see two circles, one representing the role of men and the other of women. Now, where these circles intersect, that is the area of interaction. You look at the color and the boundaries. They are very clear. They are retaining their identity, and the color is very much there. Color represents their identity and their roles. The boundaries are the guidelines for their interaction. Now, when we look at this other diagram, look at this one, the color is lost, the boundaries are not there. So an interaction which is not need-based, does not have a purpose, does not have boundaries, is not regulated, that is intermixing. Does not have a professional value, that is intermixing. We will be looking at interaction in light of Quran in a little more detail, inshallah. When we try to explore this concept of interaction a little more, I would request the participants to keep their mics kindly muted. Now, this interaction, in terms of our profession, can happen with colleagues, students, and other stakeholders of the profession, like administrators and other people who are involved in healthcare profession. So this takes us to the next segment of our talk, which is why is it important to talk about it? So in the basic concepts, we clarified the concept of gender, interaction, and intermixing. Now we are going to look at why is it important to talk about it today. Now, this concept of gender and gender interaction is not an isolated concept. This is a construct that is feeding other concepts. And when you look at those concepts, that what are the concepts that are drawing their energy from this concept, then you would understand that how important it is to talk about it today. This concept is feeding the concept of role of men and women today and the movement of feminism, the purpose and sanctity of the institution of the family, women empowerment, gender identity, the purpose of life, and the rights of the individual and the society. If you remember, when we were talking about misconceptions, there was a point that gender interaction is an individual's domain. It's not in the societal domain. So this concept is related to that idea as well. So all of these are very important concepts in the building of a society and its development. And that is why it's very important to talk about it today. Now let's see those who promote free gender intermixing in the guise of women empowerment and equality. What is their history regarding gender empowerment and respect for women and women's safety? All these, unfortunately, all these concepts are not from the Muslim world. These words have not come from there. We have borrowed them. And we have not only borrowed them, we have just accepted them. And we don't even think about the philosophies that are there behind these words. When we look at the historical perspective, what is their history? If you need some plumbing in your house and you want to ask for a plumber, the first thing that you would ask him or her is that what is your experience? What is your credibility of doing this? What have you done previously? How many good plumbing experiences do you have? And when a philosophy is being thrown to us, we do not ask them about what their credibility is. Look at these dates. These are the dates when women in UK and US got the right to vote. 1928. 1918, only women who were married or had some property could vote. 1928, it was for other women as well. And when we look at our history, the day a woman is born, she has the right to ancestry. She has the right to have an opinion. She has the right to practice her deen. She has the right to marriage. She has the right to property. She didn't have to vote for it and ask for it or go for a suffrage movement. That is what she is born with. Now, the first date that you're looking at, this is very much relatable to us. The first woman that we know in history who became the doctor was a German woman. But at that time, it was so shameful. It was so shameful to have a woman as a doctor that they did not even record her name. So we really don't know what her name was. The first American woman who became a lady doctor was Elizabeth Blackwell. She was refused admission in 29 medical schools just because she was a woman. So this is their history, this is their credibility of how respectful they are of women and how aware they are of their status. I'm going to share with you some statistics from WHO. And these statistics are so shameful. They are so shameful that I can't even read these slides for you. 1 in 3 women, unimaginable. 98 seconds, the most horrendous of the crimes of human race, the ugliest of them is happening every 98 seconds. And look at the level of justice. Only 4% of these cases, they get prison. This is a New South Wales study. Look at this list. How many fundamentalist countries do we see in this list? And how many champions of human rights are we seeing in this? So the women of today are still raising the same slogan, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. When we look at higher education, I'm going to share with you the results of an American survey of the Association of American Universities. Look at the sample size, a huge sample size, a very credible study, and look at their results. 62% of girls facing it. And teachers are also involved in that. And the worst part of it is that it is all normalized. They think this is how it is. This is what they are born for. This is natural because it happened to her mother, to grandmother, to elder sister. So if it's happening to her, then it's okay. When we look at medical education, these are the results of a Canadian study. And we see that the picture is not much different here as well. And again, the worst part is that people are not even reporting it. They think it is normal to face it because they are vulnerable as women and vulnerable as learners. A huge dilemma. Being a woman, the author thinks that being a woman is not their strength, it's their vulnerability. Now we do see that it's a huge injustice that is being done on the part of women. And it's a global thing that is happening. So what did we do? Then people responded to it, to correct it, to solve this issue, to give a solution. And we see the movements of feminism and women empowerment. And now I'm going to share with you the basic definitions of these movements and see what went wrong and why were they not able to address the issue effectively. This is how they define the process by which women gain power and control over their own lives and acquire the ability to make strategic choices. This is how women empowerment is defined by them. Transformation of power relations between women and men so that women have greater power over their own lives and men have less power. Mute kar dein isko. Less power over women's lives. Empowerment should be considered aspect of perceiving oneself as an active agent capable of making decisions. Now, when we look at these definitions, the question that we ask ourselves is, That the process by which women gain power and control over their own lives for what? Empowerment considered as an aspect of perceiving oneself as an active agent capable of making decisions about what? So what the problem here is that all of these definitions lack purpose. So empowerment without purpose is not the solution to it. It's in fact part of the problem. It's not the solution. It has led to an exclusionary bias in that it has excluded men. And not only excluded men, it has projected them as an adversary. And this is not from evidence from us, it is from them. Then we look at the movement of feminism. This movement started for gaining the right of voting for women, owning property, and the right to marriage. Imagine that even this right was not there. These were the three rights that they had asked for. When we look at this movement is described under waves. The first, second, third, and now we are in the fourth wave, which started in 2012. So when we look at the description of these waves, look at the philosophy behind this movement. Unfulfilling roles in homemaking and childcare. When we started looking at the concept of gender and interaction, we saw that men and women were created to create societies, to make homes. And now they regard it as an unfulfilling role. How nonsense could this get? Homemaking is something that is unfulfilling. Home wrecking is okay. That is something that we need to be proud of. But homemaking is an unfulfilling role. And childcare, making the future of human race, saving them, childcare, that is considered as an unfulfilling role. This is one of the slogans of the second wave of feminism. Now look at the third wave of feminism. What has come up? So now it's a bandwagon of all kinds of confusions and wrong philosophies and dirty concepts that are getting together. It's a bandwagon and everybody is trying to have their share in that. This is considered as women empowerment. This is considered as women empowerment. This is the clipping from a newspaper from Pakistan, same day, 3 news. Driving a motorbike, becoming a car technician, climbing a mountain, that is women empowerment. That is something that we need to be proud of. But this is exploitation and unfulfilling. How have we stooped so low that we regard this role as exploitation and unfulfilling? Why this is not women empowerment? The World Economic Forum gives out a global gender gap report. This, I'm going to share with you the results of the gender gap report of 2020. Look at the most improved countries. We don't see any of our so-called champions there. And still in this world today, we have 72 countries where women can't even have their own bank account. And according to their standards, gender parity would be achieved in about 100 years, political parity in about 95 years, and economic parity in about 257 years. So if we are to follow this philosophy and if we are to follow this path, then we can sit back and wait for another 300 years. There are some other gender-based exploitations that we do not consider as gender-based exploitations. For example, the 3-parent baby. Who is being exploited in bringing that baby? Who is being made to go against the nature of herself? 39 ways to make a baby. Who is the focus here? Who is being exploited? Now, how unfair, how cruel can we get to add the word of surrogate with mother, the word of mother. How cruel could we get? And what level of exploitation are we having? When this baby's body came to the shore, where do you think was his mother? Does anybody know? She was there in the depths of the sea, dead. So when children die in wars, their mothers are already dead. IDPs, all over 80% of IDPs and displaced people because of war are Muslims. And how much at risk are the women in that? I don't really need to say anything about that. Nursing homes, this is one other area that we really do not understand, is an area where women are being exploited. How many do you think in nursing homes do we have women? Over 75% of elderly living in care homes in UK are women. So all the exploitation that is happening there, they are facing it with the dual vulnerability of being a woman and an aged person as well. So we see that the situation is extremely saddening and extremely complicated. And it's an indicator of failure of us all as a human race. So what happened with these huge philosophers and these big minds? What happened? Why could not they see that if the philosophy that we have been living, this philosophy is going to bring us to this? Why are women at the focus of this discourse? The reason for that is that we are in a state of war, an ideological warfare. The world war has already begun. We don't need weapons for that. It's an ideological warfare. And the things that are being targeted is Tawheed, Risalat, and in the guise of human rights, the very concept of family, the very concepts of how we as men and women need to live in this world is being threatened. We see that the world is focusing on women and the role of women. And why is that so? When we started with the concept of gender, we saw that it is the homemaking thing. So we have a home, and there are many homes together, we have a society. And I ask you, who is the protector of these homes? The philosophy, the geography of a home. Who is the one who protects us from emotional hurt, from psychological hurt, who take care of our needs, who nurtures us? If something goes wrong, who is the first one to detect it? It's the women in that house. So they are the custodians of the home. They are the custodian of the ideology of a family and the custodian of the future. By nature, their role is so sensitive and so important that if somebody has to play with the future of human race, with the fate of human race, then she is naturally a target. Why? We understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed shaitan that he would go to hell. So now he has made a pledge. فَبِعِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ إِلَّا عِبَادِكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. So I am going to misguide them, lead them astray, all of them, except those who are your chosen people, who are sincere to you. And he pledges that I will mislead them and I will arouse in them sinful desires and I will command them. And that's exactly what's happening. In the name of free will, in the name of free mixing, this is what has happened. In the name of free mixing, we played with fire and it has burned the very fabric of our societal norms. The only way out is going back to the basics. There is no focus on the root cause. We are doing an artificial treatment, a symptomatic treatment, which is leading to more of the exploitation and more of the destruction of the family unit, which was the single most important safety valve against the exploitation of women. So now we come to the last part of our discussion, which is the guidelines. We saw the basic concepts, then we saw what happened to those basic concepts, how they were destroyed, how the basics of our ethics, normality, moral values have been exploited in the guise of modernity. So, what is the solution now? The solution that they tried to give us did not work, and for reasons that are obvious. So, what are the guidelines? What is the straight path? Where would we get the guidelines for any sort of interaction? And when it comes to men and women, it's very clear. It should be the creator himself, the one who created the men and women. So men and women have been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only He has the right and the wisdom to tell us how do we need to interact with each other and how do we need to have our lives. So this is the first thing that we have to understand, that when it comes to how we need to live, which is deen, how we need to live. So that is only the domain of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who guides us, and He is the one who has the right to make decisions about that. He has given us the path and He has given us the choice. Whichever path you would like to choose is yours. And then we would be rewarded and punished according to our choices. Then there is concept of becoming and belonging and listening and living. What is this? When we say the kalima, we become Muslims. We get a sense of belonging. And we fail after that. Belonging itself is not enough. We have to become Muslims. We listen to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ayat and ahadith, but we do not live them. That's why Allah says that, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu aminu. Lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. Why do you say things that you don't do? All these do's and don'ts of our life, the logic behind is His rahmah. These are not limitations. These are not bindings. This is His rahmah, that He doesn't want us to make errors. He doesn't want us to hurt ourselves, to destroy ourselves. And He wants us to claim the Jannah from which we had come down. So the first principle is respect the boundaries set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we cannot cross those boundaries. We have to respect those boundaries because they are there for our own safety. What are those boundaries? These surah in Quran, Surah Nisa, Surah Nur, Surah Ahzab, and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who lived the Quran. That is where the source of guidance is. This is the surah that starts, the only surah in Quran that starts with Suratun Anzalnaha wa Faradnaha. Because this is the surah that carries all these messages that are very important for us. Now you look at these 5, and these are called the higher intents or maqasid al-Sharia. You might be familiar with these words. These are the objectives of Sharia. Why should we have Sharia? So that the faith is preserved, so that life is preserved, so that the intellect is preserved, so that the progeny is protected, so that the wealth of people is protected. And all the guidelines and all the do's and don'ts are to protect these 5 elements. And the gender interaction also involves the protection of these 5 elements. These are the certain maxims of fiqh that relate to the gender interaction. Where it is permissible, when it is permissible, when it is not permissible. This is from where we draw our guidelines. And based on these guidelines, we see that intermixing is not allowed, only interaction with clear intentions and righteous intentions is allowed. intermixing is not allowed. Then when we look at this interaction, then when and why, where would this interaction would be permissible and when would be permissible? And we look at this ayah, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ, in areas of يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. So they are allies to one another in enjoining for the right and forbidding from wrong. And that too, while submitting to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If there is a need to act, only then interaction is needed. And how much is the need and for how long? And the purpose for that interaction is also defined by these guidelines. Actions ordained as permissible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, interaction in matters of righteousness and prevention of wrongdoing, societal welfare, achievement and preservation of maqasid al-sharia or the higher intents, as per the protocol of interaction defined by Allah and exemplified by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions. This is a small book where these guidelines have been summarized, on which I have based this presentation, and this is available at our website and can be downloaded as well. This gives in detail how we need to interact with our patients, their families, colleagues, teachers, and students. The first guideline is hold on to modesty. As the Prophet ﷺ says, that haya, the modesty, and this is a strange thing that English language does not have a perfect translation of the word haya. So modesty and iman are companions. If one is lifted, the other would also leave. This is how important it is. It is not just a matter of gender interaction, it's a matter of our iman. The other manifestation of that modesty is lower the gaze. And Allah says, for both men and women, يَغُضُّ أَبْصَارَكُمْ. Our communication with the external world is 80%, more than 80%, is based on our vision. So if we discipline our vision, then many of the risks that are coming with that, things that we should not be seeing or we should not be looking at, that would be safeguarded. And not only the gaze, but whatever is in your heart, that is also important. So lowering the gaze itself is not important, is not sufficient. The heart has to be pure as well. Stay clear of secluded interactions. Whether we are talking to our colleagues, whether we are talking to our students, whether we are interacting with their families, our patients, there should be no secluded interaction. Then how to approach the communication? If you remember, we said that interaction has got 3 W's: words, worldview, and wardrobe. So about the words, how we would communicate with each other. The first thing is, let ourselves be identified as people of integrity. So we are communicating with a purpose, not for chit-chat, not for socializing, not for wasting time, but we have got an important purpose behind that. And the ayah that I'm presenting to you, look at the phrase, ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَن يُعْرَفْنَ فَلَا يُؤْذَيْنَ. So that they are recognized. They are recognized as what? So does Quran give us what do we understand by this word يُعْرَفْنَ? And why? What is it that if they are identified in this way, that they would not be teased? So this ayah that we discussed earlier, this really comes to our mind. We need to communicate with each other so that this identity comes out, that these are Muslimin, Muslimat, these are Qanitin, Qanitat, Sabirin, Khashain, Khashiat, Mutasaddiqeen, Mutasaddiqat. They've got a purpose in life, they've got an identity, they've got dignity. And nobody who has got a disease in their heart can play around. Then when we are talking to each other, when we are communicating, وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا, this is for men and women both. Same gender, opposite gender. gender, but in opposite gender, it is very important, especially when we are talking about our opposite gender colleagues, students, patients. This ayah is about the way Ummahatul Mumineen were directed to communicate. But this is the guideline for us. And that guideline is min wara'il hijab. So if for them it is min wara'il hijab, who the hell are we? Ummahatul Mumineen were sitting and Hazrat Abdullah bin Ibn Maktoum came in. And he was a person who was blind by birth. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked them to go behind hijab. And they said that, Ya Rasulullah, he cannot see us. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them, but you can see him. Now, nobody can even fathom that there would be any wrong intention on the part of Ummahatul Mumineen. But the reason for this to happen and to be communicated to us is that we need to understand that we are living in a time where these things are important and they need to be taken care of. And when we talk, فَلَا تَخْدَعْنَا بِالْقَوْلِ, the way we talk, it should be in a way that people can understand that this soft speech is not because of some disease in our heart. It should be firm and straight talk. The dress code, the last W, the wardrobe. Allah has, when He counts His blessings, He counts libas, the dress, as a blessing. And when He tells us about shaitan, He tells us that, O children of Adam, let not Satan deceive you in the manner he deceived your parents. He removed their libas. That is the sanctity of libas. That's how important it is. Now, there are different words, satar, zinat, and hijab. And this book has given a bit of detail in it, a lot of detail, and I would recommend that you kindly download it and read it. But since the time is very less and we will be breaking for Maghrib prayer, inshallah, soon, we have to finish. So I would just like to say that satar for women is the whole of her body except for her face, hands, and feet. And for men, we know how much the satar is. And we as doctors have to at times deal with the breaking of satar. We have to examine patients and we have to see and we have to understand the sensitivity of this thing, that we are now we have a trust of the patient in which their satar has been broken. These are some guidelines for the dress code. When it comes to teacher-student interaction, now students need to be taught by teachers of the same gender. That is the best for better communication, better learning, and having better understanding of the subject matter as well. But when same gender teachers are not available or the competence is of not that same level, especially when we are training medical doctors, then opposite gender teacher can teach them. But then we have to be careful that if sensitive topics are being taught, like the reproductive system, it should be in a class where men and women are not together, so that the students can learn better and an environment of haya is maintained. No interaction in secluded environments and offices. If we expect opposite gender interactions in our laboratories and offices, the doors should be open, the windows should be clear so people can see who is talking to who. And we do not give any leverage to shaitan at all. Now, matters requiring privacy and confidentiality should preferably be with the same gender teacher. But if the same gender teacher is not available, opposite gender teacher can deal with such issues, but in a manner that is clear according to the protocol of not in seclusion. Patient examination, again, same gender, first preference. If the same gender doctor is not available in emergencies, The competence is less. Patient's trust is there as an indicator. Expose as required. Touch and examine only the required parts or area. Unnecessary exposure to unrelated or related persons, like patients being examined by opposite gender students, when no added learning is happening, when the same can be done on a mannequin, like a PR examination. If it can be done on a mannequin, the patient, the privacy of the patient should not be compromised in that. When it comes to treatment for Muslim women, then this is the order of priority. It should be by a Muslim lady doctor. Then, if she is not available, non-Muslim lady doctor. If that is not available, Muslim male doctor. If that is not available, then non-Muslim male doctor. The same is for men. Presence of mahram is very important. You just saw a hadith that without a mahram, a man should not come in any communication with a woman, especially in seclusion. So if a mahram is not available, then any other relative or a staff member can be there, but khalwa should not be allowed. Confidentiality of the patient has to be safeguarded, same gender or opposite gender, but it has to be safeguarded, especially in opposite gender. Now, all of these guidelines are not there to bind us as teachers. Our Prophet ﷺ said, "Innama bu'istu mu'alliman." So the attributes of the Prophet ﷺ when he was teaching Sahaba, Sahabiyat, Ummahatul Mumineen, and his daughters, those attributes have to be followed, they have to be reflected in our own personalities. So we have to act in a very wisely manner when we are dealing with our students and our graduates and our residents as Muslim doctors when it comes to opposite gender. There is no room for social gatherings, chit-chatting, or socialization online and offline. So, in summary, in communication, good intention has to be there, purposeful, professional needs, courteous but firm communication, not allowing for any space for any ulterior motives, limited to professional needs, extra care in describing or discussing sexual issues, presence of same gender person. Now, the purpose of all these guidelines is not to make it difficult. It is to make our lives easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wusaha. Yuridullahu bikumul yusr wa la yuridu bikumul usr." He doesn't want to make our lives difficult. And he's doing all this because he is Pak himself, and he wants us to be clean and Pak of all the bad things and the bad deeds. Pure and perfect purification. That is the goal for all these guidelines. We are not to follow the non-believers or the hypocrites and those who tried to promote fahisha in Muslim societies. Allah has warned them that they would be given a painful punishment in this world and the hereafter. This is how the surah ends, the surah Ahzab. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullah wa qulu qawlan sadida. Because the things that we have been talking about for the last 1 hour, there would be a time when talking straight and clear from the book would be difficult. So Allah has warned us already about that. That kulu qawlan sadida, say the straight thing. Follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah and his Prophet. Because it was a trust that was given to you, you were given the option, and you took that trust of being the vicegerent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now we have to fulfill the requirements of that trust. So in conclusion, men and women need to play their roles as ordained by Allah and not to lose sight of their primary role. They are the custodian of the human fabric of the society for the present and future, both of them. They are the guardians of the unit of human society, the family. And as professionals, we need to serve the humanity as the one who created it wants us. Seek his pleasure and not some egoistic, self centered, temporary goals that do not befit our status as vicegerent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, these were the misconceptions that I had projected earlier. And I hope that as we come to the end of this presentation, these misconceptions would have been addressed. I would like to end with this dua. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين.